AITA for refusing to pay for my girlfriend's birthday dinner. It was my girlfriend's birthday last week, and she'd been talking about doing something special. She landed on having a birthday dinner at this restaurant she'd been wanting to try for months. The place was upscale but not over the top fancy, a perfect blend of classy but casual. She set up a group invite, and soon enough, we had a confirmed list of friends and family coming out to celebrate. In total, it would be about 10 people, her sister, a few cousins who lived nearby, and some of her closest friends. It sounded fun, and honestly, I was all for it. I love seeing her happy, and being around people she cares about was the best way to kick off her new year. The night of the dinner, I picked her up from her apartment. She'd gone all out, and I have to say, I was floored when I saw her. She was wearing this beautiful dress that was somehow both elegant and playful, something that matched her perfectly. She'd done her makeup just right, nothing overdone, just enough to highlight the features I already loved. She looked like she'd walked right out of a magazine. She was all smiles, bouncing with excitement, and her energy was electric. It was like she'd been waiting for this night for ages, and I could tell she'd put a lot of thought into it. There was this spark in her eyes that was so infectious. It was impossible not to get caught up in it myself. When we arrived a little early, we checked with the hostess, and as she looked around the restaurant, I could see her taking it all in, like she was already imagining the night ahead. A few minutes later, people started showing up. Her sister was the first to arrive, and they shared one of those tight, emotional hugs that only sisters can give. Then a few friends came in, along with a couple of her cousins who had driven in from a nearby town. Everyone brought that warm vibe that comes when family and close friends get together, and there was this genuine happiness in the air. Hugs, handshakes, and laughter filled the space as people took their seats. It felt like the beginning of a perfect night, one of those rare moments where everything just seems to fall into place. We were all quickly seated, and almost as soon as we settled down, the drinks started flowing. It was like people were determined to make the most of the night from the first moment. Cocktails, wine, beers, everyone was getting into the celebration spirit. And while I would have loved to join in more, I know I was driving later, so I stuck with a single glass of wine. I was just fine with that, though, because it meant I got to sit back and watch everyone else enjoy themselves. People were ordering rounds, passing cocktails across the table to let each other taste, laughing as they tried something new. Each time a waiter came over, they were greeted with new orders, like the night was only just beginning. Even after the first hour had passed, the appetizers arrived, and they were incredible. We'd ordered a variety, so there was something for everyone to share: sliders, gourmet flatbreads, seafood bites. Plates were being passed around, forks dipping in, everyone sampling something different. My girlfriend was practically glowing, her laughter ringing out as she chatted with her friends and teased her sister over some inside joke. The drinks kept coming, and with each round, the volume rose a notch, laughter growing louder, conversations more animated. It was the kind of night where everyone was truly in the moment, savoring each bite, each sip, and each laugh. Then the main dishes started arriving, and they didn't disappoint. Everything from rich, creamy pasta to perfectly cooked steak made its way around the table. Her eyes lit up when her dish arrived. It was something she'd been excited to try, and the look of satisfaction on her face after the first bite said it all. And when it came time for dessert, she ordered a towering slice of chocolate cake. This wasn't just any cake, it was decadent, layered, and arrived with a sparkler candle on top. It caught everyone's attention, and they cheered as the server brought it over. She took a bite, her eyes closing in pure bliss, and then insisted on sharing it with everyone. Forks went flying as people tried to grab a taste, and it became this fun, messy moment that just felt right. But as the night started winding down, I noticed a shift. People were starting to gather their bags, pulling on their coats, saying their goodbyes. No one seemed to be looking at the check or even glancing at it. Everyone seemed to just assume that it would be taken care of. I looked around, waiting for someone to mention it, but everyone was moving toward the door like it was already handled. Confused, I called out, trying to keep it light, "Hey, don't forget the bill, guys." But my girlfriend stepped in at that moment and told me to let them go, that I shouldn't worry about it. There was this calm certainty in her voice, like she genuinely believed it was an obvious solution, no big deal. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, like I was somehow slow to catch on to what she'd been planning all along. "You should just cover it as a birthday gift, babe," she said, her tone casual, like she was suggesting I pick up a coffee. "You make more than anyone else here, so it's not a big deal, right?" She tilted her head slightly, eyebrows raised, her tone fully expecting agreement, as if my hesitation was unexpected. I felt like I'd been slapped. My mind started reeling. My jaw dropped, and I found myself stammering, utterly thrown off guard. Here she was, standing there as if I should have known, as if this had all been spelled out ahead of time, and I'd somehow forgotten. I replayed every conversation in my head, trying to find some hint that this was her plan, some signal that tonight's fun would come with a $550 price tag that I was supposed to pay. Nothing. There had been no heads up, no suggestion or even an offhand comment. This was the first I was hearing of it, and I was somehow expected to just be fine with covering it all just like that. What made it worse was that most of this $550 bill was from rounds and rounds of drinks I hadn't even touched. I was the designated driver, nursing a single glass of wine all night. I hadn't ordered anything extravagant, just my meal and one drink, and yet here I was, somehow expected to foot the bill for everyone's night out. But what hit the hardest wasn't even the money itself. It was the way she looked at me, genuinely baffled, almost offended, that I'd hesitate. It wasn't even a request, not a question or a favor, it was an expectation. Her reasoning. "You make more than anyone here," as if my salary somehow meant I was immune to feeling blindsided, like earning a decent income meant I should be comfortable dropping this kind of money with zero notice. There was no acknowledgement of what a big ask this was, no appreciation or even a hint that this might be a lot to spring on someone. Just a cool, calm expectation that I'd go along with it because, in her eyes, I was the one who could afford it. In that moment, 1,000 thoughts ran through my head. If she'd asked me in advance, if we'd had a conversation where she'd said, "Hey, would you mind covering this as a birthday gift?" I might have thought it over. I might have agreed, or at least contributed a larger amount if she'd split it with me. But to have her decide on my behalf, to assume I'd be fine with covering this entire bill without even running it by me. Honestly, it felt incredibly unfair. It felt like she hadn't considered me at all in this decision, like I was just a part of her plan without a say. The disrespect stung. It wasn't about whether I could afford it, it was about feeling blindsided, like my willingness to provide was simply expected without question. As I looked at her, standing there with that air of calm certainty, it hit me just how much this assumption undermined what should have been a night of celebration and joy. I tried to keep my cool as people were still saying their goodbyes, laughing and hugging and wrapping up the night. I didn't want to make a scene, especially on her birthday, and especially in front of her family and friends. But I could feel the frustration building, this tension I was trying to keep in check while pretending everything was fine. She must have noticed something, though, because she gave me this genuinely confused look, like she couldn't understand why I wasn't just going along with her plan, as if my hesitation was out of place. It was like she thought my reaction was the odd thing here, not the fact that I was being asked, on the spot, to foot the entire bill. I took a deep breath, hoping to keep things civil, and said, "Look, I'll cover my meal, yours, and the tip, but that's all I'm paying for." Her expression shifted, eyebrows knitting together in this look of disbelief. But I didn't give her time to argue. I just pulled out my card, paid for the two of us, added a generous tip, and left the rest of the bill on the table for her and her friends to figure out. Part of me felt a bit guilty, not because of the money but because I could feel the tension crackling between us in that moment. I knew she was probably more than a little tipsy and wouldn't fully process everything right then, but I didn't feel like I had any other choice. The walk back to the car was like crossing a battlefield in total silence. The air between us felt thick, weighted with the unspoken tension of what had just happened. She was clearly annoyed, maybe even embarrassed, and kept glancing over at me like she expected me to apologize or change my mind. But I just couldn't. Every step, I felt my frustration solidifying. All the unspoken expectations, the lack of communication, it was too much to just brush off. When we got to the car, I opened the door for her, but the small courtesy did nothing to smooth the tension. She slumped into the passenger seat, clearly annoyed, and I settled in behind the wheel, trying to focus on the road as I drove us back to my place. When we finally got inside, she started dropping hints that she wanted to stay up, maybe have a late drink or chat things out, but I was done for the night. She was still tipsy, clearly feeling a mix of irritation and confusion, and was looking at me like she was waiting for me to bring it up. But I just didn't have it in me to hash it out at that moment. I told her I was tired, kept my voice as neutral as possible, and headed straight to bed. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, trying to clear my mind, but the whole thing kept replaying in my head. The assumption that I'd pay without so much as a heads up, her look of confusion like I** was the one being unreasonable. It was all there, looping in my thoughts. Eventually, I closed my eyes and tried to let it go, hoping that sleep would give me some distance, but it was a restless night. The next morning, I woke up early, much earlier than her, and quietly got ready for work. Part of me was relieved she was still asleep. I wasn't ready to talk about it. I needed space, time to process everything that had happened. So I grabbed my things, slipped out, and headed to the office, hoping that a day of work would at least help me clear my head. But even at my desk, I couldn't shake the lingering frustration. Every so often, my phone would buzz with messages from her, each one a little more urgent than the last. She wanted to know why I was upset, why I'd been so cold the night before, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I was still turning the situation over in my head, wondering if I was somehow overreacting or if this was a sign of something bigger. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like this was about more than just a $550 bill. Sure, I make a good income, but it was the lack of communication, the assumption, the complete disregard for what I might feel about being put on the spot like that. It cut deeper than any amount on a check could. It was the principle of it, the idea that she would spring this on me, assume my willingness to just pay for everyone without so much as a heads up. It left me feeling like I was expected to be some kind of bottomless wallet, rather than a partner in a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. And that realization, more than anything, was what kept me from responding to her messages that day. But it didn't end there. Throughout the day, my phone kept buzzing with messages, and the knot of irritation and frustration I'd been trying to ignore started tightening. First, it was a few texts from our mutual friends, then some notifications on social media, and, to my surprise, even her family. They'd all apparently heard some version of what happened, and I could tell from their tone that they thought I was in the wrong. "You know, it's her birthday," one friend messaged. "You could have been a little more generous. It's not like you can't afford it," another one chimed in. There was this weird, almost accusatory slant to their words, and I could tell they'd been given a story that painted me as some miserly boyfriend refusing to cover his girlfriend's birthday bill out of sheer stinginess. One of her friends even went so far as to DM me, saying I needed to loosen up and show her I cared, adding that it wasn't a big deal given my income. And that comment hit me especially hard, because now, not only was my salary being treated as a reason for me to be casually generous without a second thought, but it was being used as a measure of how much I cared about her. The idea that, to some people, showing I cared meant throwing down hundreds of dollars, without hesitation, especially after the way the situation unfolded, made me feel both angry and incredibly misunderstood. It was as though my value as a partner had been reduced to how easily I could pick up a $550 tab. And it didn't stop with her friends. A couple of messages were from her family members too. I read through them, each one tinged with that same note of disbelief and judgment. Some were subtle, just reminding me how special she was and how important birthdays are. Others were more direct, suggesting I needed to get over it or reminding me that these things are expected sometimes. The fact that her family thought it was okay to chime in on something so personal, so private, and judge me for my reaction, left me feeling exposed. It was like they'd all decided, based on one version of the story, that I'd simply failed as a partner. And no one seemed to consider, even for a second, why I might have felt uncomfortable with the way things had gone down. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't even about the money itself. It was the feeling of being blindsided, the way my girlfriend hadn't thought to discuss any of this with me beforehand. If she had even hinted at her expectations, if she'd asked, I could have weighed my options, maybe even figured out a way to cover it or compromise. But instead, I was put in a position where I was expected to foot the bill without warning, and now I was supposed to just accept that. And what made it worse was that instead of trying to see things from my perspective, she went and involved other people, essentially rallying them against me. Now I was being painted as the bad guy because I'd reacted to being put on the spot. Each message felt like a jab, a reminder that no one was considering how uncomfortable it had made me feel. They all seemed to think that my financial position should automatically translate to generosity, that I should have no problem paying up just because I could. But that wasn't the point. I wasn't upset because I couldn't afford it. I was upset because the assumption was made that I would and without any respect for my own choice in the matter. It was a disregard for my feelings, my boundaries, and ultimately, my role as an equal partner. I felt as though she'd looked at me not as someone to share the experience with but as someone who could be expected to pick up the tab, and it left me feeling used. The longer I sat with that thought, the more it began to gnaw at me. What was really bothering me wasn't just the act itself but what it implied. I realized that I was questioning the very foundation of our relationship, wondering if we truly shared the same values, if we saw each other in the same way. Did she view me as her partner, or as someone she could lean on financially whenever she felt like it? Did her family and friends expect that I would be the provider simply because I made more money? It left me feeling unsettled, like I was being sized up based on what I could contribute financially rather than who I was as a person. I kept thinking about the way she had looked at me that night, surprised that I'd hesitated, almost as if my refusal to cover the bill was a personal affront. In her eyes, this wasn't even supposed to be an issue, it was supposed to be automatic, unquestionable. And now, with the chorus of friends and family echoing her sentiment, it felt like I was facing an avalanche of judgment. It was like the idea of discussing it with me beforehand, of treating me as an equal partner with a choice, wasn't even on the table. Am I AITA because I didn't pay the full bill at the restaurant? Update 1. As the days passed, I could feel the tension between us solidify. The messages from her friends and family eventually tapered off, but the silence that replaced them felt even heavier. She hadn't brought up the night of the dinner or the bill again, at least not directly, but there was an unmistakable strain between us. It was there in the way she avoided eye contact, in the occasional, passive-aggressive sighs, in the unspoken resentment that seemed to linger whenever we were in the same room. I could sense that she was waiting for me to bring it up, to offer an apology, maybe even change my mind about the whole situation, but I didn't. For me, the principle of it all still lingered heavily. I'd hoped that by giving each other some space, we'd both have a chance to cool off, maybe see things from a different perspective, but that wasn't the case. Days passed, and it became clear that instead of seeing my side, she was only growing more indignant. I could see it in her body language, the way she was carrying herself around me as though she was waiting for me to break, to see reason, to come around and somehow make it right. Eventually, though, the silence broke. I'd been hoping to put this whole situation behind us, thinking that maybe she'd let it go after some time. But one evening, as we were getting ready to meet up with friends for a casual dinner, she turned to me with this expression that told me whatever she was about to say wasn't going to be easy to hear. With a cool tone, she informed me that since I hadn't paid for the entire dinner on her birthday, I still owed her a real gift. According to her, the fact that I'd only covered her meal and the tip and made it awkward by calling the other guests back to pay for their shares meant that what I'd contributed that night didn't count as a gift at all. Her words hit me like a punch. I felt blindsided all over again. The fact that she could look me in the eye and so calmly tell me that what I'd already paid a significant amount by any standard wasn't even considered a gesture worthy of being called a gift was baffling. She didn't seem to grasp that $550, even when split between 2 meals and a tip, was still a significant amount. It wasn't like I'd been stingy. I'd paid for her, I'd tipped generously, and yet somehow, in her eyes, I'd failed to show her how much I cared because I hadn't extended that generosity to cover everyone else's meal. To her, the fact that I could have paid the full bill but chose not to was evidence of my unwillingness to truly celebrate her. It was as if she'd assigned a monetary value to my feelings, and because I hadn't reached that arbitrary figure, my efforts were somehow invalid. I was taken aback, floored by how the situation had turned into this bizarre measurement of my worth as a partner. It didn't seem to matter that I'd shown up, that I'd been there by her side all evening, that I'd celebrated with her friends and family. In her mind, my presence and my partial contribution weren't enough to count as a gift, and here she was, expecting more. The entire situation felt surreal. As I stood there, trying to process her words, I realized how deeply our values and expectations were clashing. To me, the concept of a gift wasn't defined solely by its price tag or the scale of a gesture. I'd been willing to celebrate with her, to make her feel special, but I'd also expected some level of respect for my own boundaries and comfort. I thought she would see that my choice to pay for our share alone was my way of balancing both her happiness and my sense of fairness. But instead, she had taken it as an insult, a failure on my part to meet her expectations. In that moment, I felt like I was looking at her through an entirely new lens. This wasn't just about the birthday dinner anymore. It was about how she viewed me, how she viewed our relationship, and perhaps even how she viewed money. There was this underlying assumption that my income put me in a position to spend freely, without regard for my own feelings or limits. And now, because I hadn't met that unspoken expectation, I was being told I owed her another gift. I told myself that maybe I was overthinking it, maybe there was some misunderstanding, some miscommunication that could explain this. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Her words, her tone, the calm entitlement with which she'd told me I still owed her, they all pointed to something far more troubling. She genuinely believed that her happiness, her sense of being celebrated, hinged on whether or not I'd covered that entire bill. And because I hadn't, she was now treating me as though I'd failed her. This was supposed to be a special moment for both of us, a celebration of her birthday and our time together. But instead, it had devolved into a situation where I was being treated like a checkbook, my worth as a boyfriend measured by the amount I was willing to spend. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being asked to validate her, to prove my love and commitment through money, rather than through any genuine connection or shared experience. And as much as I wanted to smooth things over, to make her feel happy and cherished, I couldn't bring myself to fulfill her demand. I didn't want to set a precedent where I felt compelled to buy her affection, to prove my love through increasingly extravagant gestures. So, when I finally gathered my thoughts and addressed her again, I made it clear that what I had paid for at the restaurant was, indeed, my gift. I wouldn't be giving her anything else, and I certainly wasn't going to apologize for respecting my own boundaries. The disappointment on her face was evident, but I stood firm. Because in that moment, I knew that this was about more than just one night, one dinner, or even one birthday. This was about the kind of relationship we were building, and I couldn't continue down a path where my worth was defined by my bank balance. Whether or not she understood that, I wasn't sure. But I knew, deep down, that this was a boundary I couldn't cross, no matter the cost to my relationship.